48 hours after the preliminary report prepared by the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau was presented before the Ministry of Civil Aviation, Air India has finally responded. It certainly appears from the first response that has come in from the CEO of Air India, a clean sheet has already been given. This is what the CEO of Air India had to say, and I'm quoting. The preliminary report found no mechanical or maintenance issues with the aircraft or engines, and that all mandatory maintenance tasks had been completed. There was no issue with the quality of fuel and no abnormality with the takeoff roll. The pilots had passed their mandatory pre-flight breath analyzer and there were no observations pertaining to their medical status. I would also remind that out of an abundance of caution and under the oversight of the DGCA, every Boeing 787 aircraft operating in our fleet was checked within days of the accident and all were found fit for service. Now, this comes at a time when the preliminary report essentially indicated that there was a possibility of an engine failure. In fact, the RAT, which is basically an emergency power backup, was already deployed by the pilot immediately after takeoff, suggesting that perhaps the engines were not operating. In fact, the cockpit audio voice recording essentially indicates that the engines were not operating, resulting in no thrust being given to the aircraft. So much so there was a last-minute attempt that was also made by the pilots to ensure that fuel is being provided to the engines and relighting was being done by the pilots. But that wasn't really enough to give the necessary lift to the aircraft, resulting in the unfortunate crash that took place. Having said that, with the engines now becoming a bone of contention and more importantly, Air India not following a certain advisories that were basically issued back in the year 2018 with regards to the fuel switch control system. And that remains the biggest talking point as to whether at all the advisory that was given by the FAA in the United States of America wasn't really followed up by Air India. If not, why wasn't it done? There has been absolutely no word really coming in from the Air India CEO as far as the fuel switch control system is concerned. And that becomes the biggest talking point only because it turns out that when the takeoff had actually taken place, one of the pilot members had seen that from runoff to cutoff, that's the transition in the fuel that took place, which essentially meant that the engine wasn't receiving the fuel that was necessary for the takeoff, resulting in a complete reboot being done by the pilots. That wasn't really enough because all of this happened within just about 32 seconds.